Driving home late from the office, billionaire Jack Thompson slammed on his brakes, stunned to see his maid, Elizabeth Jones, kneeling at his gate, feeding a fragile 6-year-old homeless boy. In that instant, shock turned into a choice that would change everything. The city skyline glowed like a crown of glass and steel as Jack Thompson leaned back in the leather seat of his black Mercedes. The man was an empire in human form, CEO of one of the biggest financial firms in the country, feared in the boardroom and respected on Wall Street, but behind the tinted windows and expensive suit, Jack was just tired. The day had been a battlefield of deals, backstabbing partners, and endless phone calls. His assistant had offered to arrange dinner at an exclusive restaurant, but he waved it off. Food had lost its taste years ago. Jack lived for control, for order. He hated surprises, and he hated anything that disrupted the perfect bubble he had built around his life. Still, there was something else buried deeper. Loneliness clung to him like a shadow. His wife had passed away years earlier, and his only son studied overseas, too busy to call. Jack told himself he didn't care. Money was enough. Power was enough. But even he knew the silence of his mansion was deafening when he walked in at night. Meanwhile, in a small staff kitchen tucked at the far end of that mansion, Elizabeth Jones was finishing the last of her evening chores. Her apron was clean, her hair tied neatly in a bun, and her movements efficient. She wasn't the kind of maid who drew attention. She believed in blending into the background. But unlike her employer, Elizabeth's life was far from orderly. At 32, she was still paying off debts from her late mother's hospital bills. Every month was a battle between survival and duty. Yet, she carried a heart too soft for the hard world around her. When Elizabeth left the back door to toss away the trash earlier that evening, she noticed him, a little boy no older than 6, huddled by the iron gates. His clothes were torn, his face smeared with dirt and his arms wrapped tightly around his shivering body. His big brown eyes followed every car that passed, as though praying one might stop. Elizabeth's heart clenched. She knew what hunger looked like. Without thinking, she hurried back to the kitchen, filled a plate with leftover bread, soup, and a small piece of chicken, and quietly slipped outside. The boy looked up as she knelt by him. "Are you hungry, sweetheart?" she whispered. He nodded shyly, his lips trembling. Elizabeth smiled gently, setting the plate before him. "Eat slowly, okay? No one should go to bed hungry." It was an act of kindness she thought no one would ever notice. On the other side of town, Jack was wrapping up his last call when his driver slowed the car near the gates of his estate. Jack glanced up from his phone, ready to dismiss whatever the delay was, until he saw it. The headlights cut through the night, freezing the scene like a photograph. Elizabeth, his maid, kneeling on the cold ground, holding a plate of food. And before her, a ragged little boy with hollow cheeks and desperate eyes, devouring each bite as though it were the first meal in days. Jack blinked, his jaw tightening. Shock struck him like a wave. He wasn't just surprised, he was unsettled. Why was his maid outside, at his gates, feeding a homeless child like some street volunteer? The Mercedes rolled to a stop. For the first time in years, Jack Thompson felt something he didn't know how to name, a crack in his fortress of indifference, and in that instant, 3 lives began to collide in ways none of them could have imagined. Jack pushed open the car door before his driver could circle around. His polished shoes clicked against the cobblestone driveway as he strode toward the gate, his eyes locked on the scene. Elizabeth jerked at the sound. The plate in her hand wobbled, nearly spilling. Her heart slammed against her ribs as she turned to see him, her employer, Jack Thompson, standing in the glow of headlights, his face carved into a mixture of disbelief and stern authority. "Mr. Thompson," she stammered, rising quickly to her feet. This isn't—" Jack raised a hand, silencing her. His gaze shifted to the boy crouched behind her skirt, clutching the bread as though it were treasure. The child's frightened eyes darted from Elizabeth to Jack, then back again. For a moment no one spoke. The only sound was the boy chewing, hurried and desperate. Jack's voice, when it came, was cool and edged with suspicion. "What exactly is going on here, Elizabeth?" Elizabeth swallowed hard. "He was hungry, sir. Just a child. I thought it would do no harm to give him something to eat." "No harm?" Jack repeated, his brows knitting. "Do you have any idea what this looks like? Allowing strangers onto my property? Feeding vagrants at my gate like this is some soup kitchen?" Elizabeth flinched at the word vagrant. She dropped her gaze, ashamed but unwilling to back down. "I couldn't ignore him, he's only 6. Look at him." Her voice cracked as she gestured toward the boy. Jack did look. He saw the dirt smudged across the boy's cheeks, the thin arms, the shoes that were little more than scraps. But instead of softening, his jaw tightened further. "This isn't my problem," he told himself. "This isn't my responsibility." "Elizabeth," he said sharply, "you work for me, not for the streets of this city. Feeding him may seem kind, but kindness has consequences. What if he tells others? What if tomorrow there are 10 children outside these gates? Do you want my home overrun?" Elizabeth's throat ached. She wanted to explain, to beg for understanding, but all she managed was a whisper. "I couldn't watch him starve." The boy, sensing her fear, tugged gently at her apron. "Please, Mum. I won't come back if it's bad," he murmured softly, crumbs on his lips. Something in his voice pierced the night, and Jack's chest. It was faint, like an echo of a memory he had buried long ago. His son's voice when he was that age, small, trembling, innocent. Jack turned abruptly, running a hand across his face as if wiping away the thought. He wasn't ready to feel. He wasn't ready to face what this sight stirred inside him. Elizabeth, trembling, spoke again. "Sir, if you want to fire me, I'll understand, but I couldn't turn him away." Her words hung in the cold air like a verdict. Jack pivoted, his eyes hard but unsettled. "We'll discuss this inside," he said finally, his tone clipped. Then, after a pause, he added, "Bring the boy with you." Elizabeth blinked, stunned. She hadn't expected that. Neither had the boy, whose wide eyes filled with something foreign, hope. As Jack strode back toward the house, his shadow stretched long across the driveway. Behind him, Elizabeth gathered the child in her arms, whispering, "It's going to be okay." But her heart raced. She had no idea what Jack Thompson would do next, and neither did he. Inside the mansion, silence pressed against the marble walls. The boy's small footsteps echoed faintly as Elizabeth led him into the grand foyer, her heart pounding with every sound. The glittering chandelier, polished floors, and cold perfection of the place seemed to swallow him whole. He looked so out of place, barefoot, fragile, clinging to her hand as though she were his lifeline. Jack followed, his expression unreadable. He removed his coat, draping it neatly on the stand, but his eyes never left them. He was studying, calculating, wrestling with something that unsettled him. Elizabeth broke the silence first. "Sir, if you're angry, I understand. But please, don't take it out on him. He's just a child." Jack's brow furrowed. "Elizabeth, do you realize what position you've put me in, bringing strangers into this house? Do you know how this looks?" Her voice trembled, but her eyes lifted to meet his. "It looks human, Mr. Thompson." The words cut through the air sharper than she intended. For a moment, Jack just stared at her, stunned that his maid would dare to speak to him like that. He exhaled sharply, pacing across the foyer. "Humanity doesn't pay the bills. Humanity doesn't keep this house standing or keep wolves at bay. I built all this by making hard choices, not soft ones. You think the world rewards kindness? It doesn't. It eats people alive." Elizabeth glanced at the boy, who was now staring at Jack with wide eyes, as though the man's booming voice might swallow him too. She knelt, pulling the child close, whispering, "It's all right, sweetheart." The tenderness of that gesture gnawed at Jack more than he wanted to admit. It reminded him of nights when his late wife used to comfort their son in exactly the same way. But instead of softening, he snapped, "And what about tomorrow? What if 10 more children show up at my gate? What then? Do we feed the entire street?" Elizabeth's spine stiffened. "If they're hungry, maybe we should." The defiance in her voice shocked even her. She wasn't usually bold with him. She had always been careful to maintain her place. But something about this boy brought out a courage she didn't know she had. Jack shook his head, muttering, You don't understand, Elizabeth. Compassion is a luxury, and luxuries have prices. Her gaze hardened. No, Mr. Thompson. Compassion is survival. For people like him. For people like me. The boy tugged at her sleeve, whispering timidly, "Miss, I can go. I don't want you to get in trouble." His small voice cracked, heavy with shame. Elizabeth's eyes burned. She hugged him tighter. "You don't need to go anywhere tonight," she said softly. Jack turned away, rubbing his temples. He felt trapped between two worlds. His carefully guarded fortress of wealth and the fragile truth standing right in front of him. A child who had nothing. Finally he spoke, his tone clipped. "Enough. The boy can stay for tonight, but in the morning we'll figure this out, and Elizabeth..." His eyes pinned her in place. "We will be having a serious discussion about your position here." Elizabeth's breath caught. Her job, her only source of survival, hung by a thread. But even in that fear, she felt no regret, because in her heart, she knew she had done the right thing. Elizabeth guided the little boy into the mansion's vast living room, where golden light spilled across leather sofas and polished floors. The child's eyes widened, not in awe, but in disbelief, like he had stepped into another world that didn't belong to him. He clutched Elizabeth's hand tighter, his small body trembling. Jack followed slowly, loosening his tie, his expression as rigid as ever. "He can stay here tonight," he said curtly. "One night. Nothing more." Elizabeth nodded quickly, grateful for even that small mercy. "Thank you, sir." She sat the boy on the edge of the sofa. "What's your name, sweetheart?" The boy hesitated, his voice barely above a whisper. "Daniel." Elizabeth smiled warmly. "Daniel, that's a strong name." Jack's gaze lingered on the boy, arms crossed. He didn't say it aloud, but the name hit him harder than he expected. Daniel. His late wife once suggested that name for their son before choosing another. The coincidence unsettled him, though he brushed it off with a frown. Elizabeth slipped into the kitchen, quickly preparing warm milk and reheating a bowl of soup. As she worked, she whispered to herself, "Lord, please don't let him throw me out tomorrow." When she returned, Daniel's face lit up at the sight of food. He ate slowly this time, glancing nervously at Jack as though waiting for permission. Jack noticed. "Eat," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "No one's taking it away." The boy nodded shyly and continued. Elizabeth sat beside him, gently stroking his hair. "See? You're safe now." Jack turned away, pouring himself a glass of scotch. He stood by the window, staring out at the dark garden, trying to convince himself this was temporary. But behind him, the soft sounds of spoon against bowl, Elizabeth's murmured reassurances, and the boy's quiet sighs of relief gnawed at him. The house had not felt this alive in years. After dinner, Elizabeth led Daniel upstairs to the small guest room. She helped him wash up, found an old blanket, and tucked him into bed. He clutched the pillow tightly, as though afraid it might disappear. "Miss Elizabeth," he whispered. "Yes, dear? Do you think God forgot me?" Her chest tightened. She brushed his hair back gently. "No, Daniel. God never forgets anyone. Sometimes he just sends help in ways we don't expect." The boy's eyes fluttered closed, a faint smile touching his lips as sleep finally claimed him. Elizabeth lingered, watching him breathe evenly, then quietly slipped out of the room. She nearly jumped when she saw Jack standing in the hallway, hands in his pockets watching. "You care too much," Jack said quietly. Elizabeth met his gaze. "Is that such a crime?" His jaw tightened. "In my world, caring gets you destroyed." She shook her head softly. "Maybe in your world. But in his, caring might be the only thing that keeps him alive." For a long moment, they stood there in silence. Two people from opposite worlds, forced together by a single act of kindness, neither could ignore. Finally, Jack turned away, muttering, "We'll talk in the morning." But even as he walked back toward his room, He couldn't shake the image of the boy sleeping peacefully in a warm bed for the first time in who knows how long. And he hated to admit it. Some part of him felt lighter knowing that. The mansion was still, the kind of silence that made even the hum of the air conditioning feel loud. Jack sat alone in his study, a half-finished glass of scotch on the mahogany desk beside him. He should have been reviewing tomorrow's contracts, but his mind kept drifting back to the image of Daniel at the table, small hands gripping the spoon, eyes glancing nervously as though expecting someone to snatch the food away. Jack rubbed his temples. He remembered another boy, his own son, sitting at that same dining table years ago, giggling over spilled milk. Back then, laughter filled the halls. Back when his wife was alive. Back before the accident that tore it all away. He clenched his jaw. The pain of those memories was why he had built walls so high. Kindness reminded him of loss, and loss was unbearable. A soft knock pulled him from the spiral. "Come in," he said flatly. Elizabeth entered quietly, her hands clasped in front of her. "I just wanted to let you know. Daniel's asleep. He hasn't slept that peacefully in a long time, I think." Jack gave a short nod, but didn't look at her. "Good. Tomorrow I'll call social services. They'll know what to do with him." Elizabeth's chest tightened. "With respect, sir, do you know what happens to boys like him in the system?" His eyes flicked up sharply. "Better than living on the streets." She stepped forward, her voice low but steady. "Not always. I know because I was him once." Jack's brow furrowed. Elizabeth swallowed hard. "My mother worked 3 jobs. We lost our home when I was about his age. For months we lived in shelters, sometimes in the back of a car. I remember what it felt like, wondering if anyone saw me or if I was invisible. And I remember the one woman who gave me food outside a church one night. That meal, it kept me alive. That's why I couldn't walk past him." For the first time, Jack was speechless. He stared at her, the edges of his cold exterior softening as her words sank in. Elizabeth lowered her gaze, ashamed. "I know I crossed a line tonight, but when I look at him I see myself, and if I don't help, who will?" The room fell quiet. Jack leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. He didn't admit it, but her confession struck deeper than he wanted. After a long pause, he asked, "What about his parents? Where are they?" Elizabeth hesitated. "He hasn't said much, just that his mother isn't around anymore. And his father—" She shook her head. "I think he's alone." Jack stared into his glass, the amber liquid trembling slightly in his grip. Alone. The word echoed inside him, heavier than he cared to admit. Elizabeth waited, unsure if she had said too much. Finally, Jack muttered, almost to himself, "The world has a cruel way of repeating itself." Elizabeth's eyes softened. For a moment, she saw not the billionaire CEO, but a man weighed down by ghosts. Before leaving, she said quietly, "Sometimes, Mr. Thompson, the only way to heal is to let yourself care again." When the door closed, Jack sat in the silence, Elizabeth's words lingering like a challenge he wasn't ready to face. The morning sunlight spilled through the tall windows of the Thompson estate, softening the usually cold marble halls. Elizabeth rose early, as always, but today her steps carried a different weight. She wasn't just preparing breakfast for Jack anymore. She was also thinking of Daniel, who had slept soundly for the first time in who knows how long. When she peeked into the guest room, she found the boy awake, sitting cross-legged on the bed, hugging the blanket like it was a treasure. "Good morning, Daniel," she said warmly. He grinned shyly. "Morning, Miss Elizabeth. Is it really okay that I'm here?" Her heart tightened. "Yes, sweetheart. You're safe." Downstairs, Jack was already at the dining table, coffee in hand, scrolling through the morning news on his tablet. He barely glanced up when Elizabeth entered with Daniel trailing behind her. But then something unexpected happened. Daniel stopped halfway into the room, staring wide-eyed at the enormous chandelier overhead. "Whoa," he breathed, his little mouth forming an O. "It's like stars inside the house." Elizabeth chuckled softly. Jack lowered his tablet, watching the boy curiously. The way Daniel's eyes sparkled reminded him so much of his son when he was that age, innocent wonder untouched by the weight of the world. Elizabeth guided Daniel to the table. "Sit here, dear." He hesitated, then whispered, "Is it okay? I don't want to mess anything up." Before Elizabeth could reassure him, Jack's voice cut through, steadier than usual. "Sit, you won't break the table." Daniel blinked, surprised, then smiled faintly and climbed onto the chair. Elizabeth served him pancakes with syrup and a glass of milk. The boy's eyes widened. "This is more than I've ever had for breakfast," Jack's brow furrowed. He watched the boy devour the pancakes, sticky syrup clinging to his cheeks. For the first time in years, he almost laughed. It was messy, chaotic, utterly imperfect, but strangely comforting. Elizabeth caught Jack's softened expression. She said gently, "Sometimes the smallest things feel like the biggest gifts." Jack shifted uncomfortably, returning his gaze to his coffee. "Don't expect this to be permanent," he muttered. Daniel looked up, chewing. "Even if it's just today, thank you, mister." Jack froze. The boy's gratitude disarmed him in a way he couldn't explain. He cleared his throat and changed the subject. "Do you go to school, Daniel?" The boy's fork slowed. He shook his head. "Not since my mom went away. I try to read signs on the street, though. That's how I learned some words." Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears. Jack felt something twist in his chest. A 6-year-old teaching himself letters from street signs? Trying to mask the ache, Jack said gruffly, "Education is important. No child should be without it." Elizabeth's gaze flicked to him. "Then maybe this is your chance to change that, sir." Jack met her eyes, the challenge clear. He didn't respond, but her words lingered. Later that day, Elizabeth found Daniel in the library, staring at the rows of books like they were treasures. She handed him a simple storybook and sat beside him. To her surprise, Jack appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame, quietly watching. Elizabeth encouraged, "Go on, Daniel, sound out the words." The boy stumbled through the sentences, mispronouncing a few, but persevered. Elizabeth's patience lit the room, her voice guiding him gently. Jack listened, something unexplainable stirring inside him. For the first time in years, his house felt alive, not with wealth, but with warmth. And for one fleeting moment, he allowed himself to imagine what it might feel like, if it stayed this way. The next evening, the mansion no longer felt so warm. Jack had just returned from the office, his face set in a storm. He dropped his briefcase on the table and loosened his tie with sharp, impatient movements. Elizabeth, sensing his mood the moment he entered, paused nervously as she folded laundry in the corner. "What happened?" she asked softly. Jack didn't answer right away. He poured himself a drink, the crystal clinking louder than usual. Finally he muttered, "Words gotten out." Elizabeth frowned. "About Daniel?" Jack's eyes snapped to hers. "A colleague called me this afternoon. Said people have seen a boy hanging around the estate. Whispers are already circling. Do you have any idea what this does to my reputation? A CEO harboring street children? They'll paint me as unstable, reckless. Investors don't like men who lose control." Elizabeth's chest tightened. "So your reputation matters more than a starving 6-year-old's life." Jack slammed the glass down, liquid spilling onto the desk. His voice rose. "Don't twist this. You think I don't care. I've worked my entire life to build this empire. Every decision I've made, every sacrifice was to keep control. I can't risk everything for one child. I won't." From the hallway, a small voice trembled. "Mr. Jack?" Both turned. Daniel stood there, his little face pale, eyes wide with fear. He had heard everything. Elizabeth's heart sank. "Daniel, it's okay." But Jack, still seething, barked without thinking, "You shouldn't be eavesdropping. This isn't your home." The words hit like a whip. Daniel flinched, his lips trembling. Tears filled his eyes as he whispered, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." Then he turned and ran, small footsteps echoing down the hall. Elizabeth's eyes blazed with fury as she rounded on Jack. "How could you? He's just a child." Do you have any idea how many times he's probably heard that same line? This isn't your home? And now you, the one person who could have given him hope, said it too. Jack's chest heaved. He wanted to take the words back, but his pride locked them in his throat. Instead, he shot back, "Don't forget your place, Elizabeth. You work for me. You don't get to lecture me." Elizabeth's hands shook. "If being human means forgetting my place, then so be it, because I refuse to stand by while you crush that boy's spirit." The tension between them hung thick, cutting like glass. Finally, Elizabeth spun away, her voice breaking. "If you truly believe your reputation is worth more than his life, then I misjudged you completely." She stormed out of the room, her footsteps chasing after Daniel. Jack was left standing in the silence, the echo of his own harsh words clawing at him. He pressed his hands against the desk, staring down, breath ragged. For the first time in years, he wasn't angry at the world, he was angry at himself. But he couldn't admit it. Not yet. The night after the fight was heavy with silence. Elizabeth sat on the edge of Daniel's bed, her hand resting gently on his back as he curled into the blanket. He hadn't said a word since Jack's outburst. His eyes were red, but the tears had dried, leaving behind a hollow stillness that broke her heart. "Miss Elizabeth," his voice finally whispered into the darkness, "he doesn't want me here, does he?" Her throat tightened. "Oh, sweetheart, sometimes grown-ups say things they don't mean when they're scared. But don't you believe for 1 second that you don't matter. You matter more than you know." Daniel sniffled. "Everywhere I go, they tell me I don't belong." Elizabeth stroked his hair, her own tears slipping free. "Then let me tell you something different. You belong, Daniel. Even if the whole world forgets you, I won't." She stayed with him until his breathing evened out in sleep, but her heart was restless. Downstairs, Jack was pacing in his study, wrestling with his own demons. He replayed the moment over and over, Daniel's face crumpling at his harsh words, Elizabeth's fury, the echo of his own voice shouting, "This isn't your home." He poured another drink, but it didn't dull the guilt clawing at his chest. Jack's pride told him he had done the right thing, that protecting his reputation, his empire, was all that mattered. But his heart whispered something else. It reminded him of nights when his son had crawled into bed after a nightmare, asking in a trembling voice, "Daddy, am I safe here?" He had always answered yes. Always. Now another child had asked the same question with his eyes, and Jack had answered no. Unable to bear the thought, he set the glass aside and sank into his chair. The silence pressed in on him, louder than any boardroom argument. For years, he had believed compassion was weakness, but tonight, for the first time, he wondered if pride was the real weakness. Elizabeth appeared in the doorway, her arms folded. She looked tired, her face pale from holding back tears. "You hurt him," she said softly, without accusation, just truth. Jack closed his eyes. "I know. You can still fix it." His jaw tightened. "You don't understand. Everything I have, everything I've built, it could all come crashing down if I make the wrong move." Elizabeth stepped closer. "And what if everything you've built means nothing, if you can't live with yourself? Is an empire worth more than a child's heart?" Her words landed like stones in his chest. He looked up at her, and for the first time, his eyes weren't cold, but lost. "What if I don't know how to fix it?" She held his gaze steadily. "Start by choosing him. Just once, choose him over your pride." Jack's breath shook as he looked away. In that moment, he realized the truth. He had a choice. He could let the boy walk away tomorrow and return to the safety of his walls, or he could open the gates, not just of his mansion, but of his heart. And that choice would define not just Daniel's future, but his own. Morning light filtered through the curtains, softening the sharp edges of the mansion. Elizabeth stirred early, her thoughts heavy. She feared today might be the end, that Jack would send Daniel away, and her with him. She entered the kitchen quietly, only to stop in her tracks. Jack was already there, standing awkwardly by the stove, coffee mug in hand. Across the table, Daniel sat with a book open in front of him. Jack cleared his throat. "I was helping him with some words." Elizabeth blinked, stunned. The billionaire CEO, the man who never lifted a finger outside of business, was sitting at the table pointing to letters while a 6-year-old boy stumbled through sentences. Daniel beamed when he saw her. "Miss Elizabeth, Mr. Jack says I'm getting better." Jack coughed, as if embarrassed by the boy's enthusiasm. "He's a quick learner," he admitted quietly. Elizabeth's eyes softened, her heart swelling. Something had shifted. Jack set down his mug and looked at her directly. "Elizabeth, I thought about what you said last night, about choosing him." His voice wavered, but he steadied it. "I can't undo the words I spoke, but I can choose differently today, and every day after if he'll let me." Daniel's wide eyes filled with hope. "Does that mean I can stay?" Jack's throat tightened. He crouched down so he was eye level with the boy. "Daniel, if you'll have me, this can be your home. I don't know much about being what you need, but I'd like to try." The boy's lip quivered before he flung his small arms around Jack's neck. Jack froze for a moment, stunned by the warmth of the embrace. Then slowly, almost uncertainly, he wrapped his arms around Daniel. For the first time in years, his heart felt full. Elizabeth watched, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. This was the man she had hoped still existed beneath the armor, the one capable of love, even after loss. Jack stood, placing a steady hand on Daniel's shoulder. He turned to Elizabeth. "I owe you an apology. I was wrong to question your compassion. You saw what I refused to see. If not for you, I'd still be blind." Elizabeth shook her head. "No apology needed, sir. I only did what anyone should do." But Jack smiled faintly. "No, you did what very few would have had the courage to do." The weight in the room lifted. For the first time in years, the mansion didn't feel like a prison of glass and marble. It felt alive. Later that afternoon, Jack stood at the gate, the very place this story had begun. He watched as Daniel played in the garden, laughter echoing against the walls. The sound was foreign, yet familiar, like a melody he thought he'd forgotten. Elizabeth stepped beside him. "Funny, isn't it? How one small act at this gate changed everything." Jack exhaled slowly, eyes still on the boy. "Yes, that night I thought you were breaking my rules. Turns out, you were breaking my walls." Elizabeth smiled, the sunlight catching the tears in her eyes. Jack looked at her then, not as an employee, but as the woman who had reminded him of his humanity. "Thank you, Elizabeth, for saving him, and for saving me." As Daniel's laughter filled the air, Jack Thompson finally allowed himself to believe that sometimes the greatest empires weren't built in boardrooms, but in hearts willing to love again. Do you believe true love and compassion can break even the strongest walls of pride? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments. I'd love to hear them.